3 of the Triple Option Podcast. Today is December 3rd, 2019. It's getting close to Christmas, but it's even closer to Conference Champion Weekend. We have some great games on the slate. For starters, we have Ohio State and Wisconsin. That's a good rematch. LSU and Georgia meeting for the first time this season. Utah and Oregon, and Baylor and Oklahoma. So we have some really good matchups, and these matchups are going to shake out the college football playoffs, and I'm really excited to see what happens. There's a bunch of scenarios. The more you try to think about it, the more confusing it gets, which is what college football is all about. I know that sounds a little weird, but it's really exciting in that aspect. So I first want to talk about Ohio State versus Wisconsin. Let's go back to last week. Ohio State had their matchup against Michigan. I thought it was a good game for the most part. When Michigan came out and punched Ohio State in the face and it was 7-0 early on, I was like, all right, we got a ball game. Michigan came to play, and I mean, they did come to play, but Ohio State's offense is just so powerful because even when their defense struggled, they still found a way to put up 50-plus points. And I understand Michigan doesn't have the greatest defense in the country, but Michigan has good ball players on that side of the ball. They stuck around and they made big plays. Ohio State, they struggled. They couldn't score consistently early on, and that was a big win for Michigan. But like I said, Ohio State's offense is they're a well-oiled machine, especially this late in the season. I mean, you couldn't really expect them to regress. They're so dominant all season. How are they going to regress? In their last game, Game 12. Justin Fields threw for 302 yards and 4 touchdowns to 4 different people, might I add. Maybe 3 different people. Anyway, but he did have an injury scare, and that's really scary for Ohio State fans because the week prior versus Penn State, he went down in the fourth quarter in garbage time. But yeah, he went down with that knee injury. But when he came back, I didn't know if he'd come back. He went back in the tent, but I mean, he walked off the field. That was a good sign. But when he came back, that first play he came back, he threw a 30-yard bomb to Garrett Wilson. And not only did he throw a really good pass in the back of the end zone to Garrett Wilson, but he scrambled out of the pocket with that big knee brace on, scrambled out of the pocket and still show he had it in him. I think he'll be fine this week for Wisconsin. And then J.K. Dobbins, he had 211 yards on 31 carries. J.K. Dobbins has been a beast this season. I know he was good. I would say he was very good his first 2 seasons at Ohio State. It looked like they weren't as committed to running the ball his first 2 seasons with Urban Meyer, but Ryan Day loves giving him the ball. It reminds me a little bit of when Ezekiel Elliott was there. They just kept feeding him the ball, and that's what they're doing with J.K. Dobbins. In the last 2 weeks, he has 368 yards on 68 carries. And Ohio State, early in the game when Justin Fields wasn't hitting his targets, Ohio State could rely on J.K. Dobbins. He took him down the field on that first drive. There was a big third down. It was a pass on, I believe it was like an angle or a Texas route over the middle to J.K. Dobbins. So he's really carrying the workload and it showed when Justin Fields isn't hot, J.K. Dobbins can carry that workload. But just terrific last 2 games for him. The biggest concern, though, for Ohio State was the defense. They gave up 27 points, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's the most they've given up this season. And they gave up almost 400 yards on average. They're allowing 232 yards this season, so it's a bit of a concern there, especially because you're going to the Big Ten championship game. Wisconsin loves running the ball, especially when you have a guy like Jonathan Taylor. Why wouldn't you? But then, if they make it to the playoffs, which more than likely they will, you're going to be playing much better offenses that can throw the ball better than anyone you've played. So to have your worst defensive performance, points-wise at least, it's a bit of a concern, especially Chase Young. I don't know if he was having a bad day or if Michigan just saw something in tape and found out how to stop him. He had 0 tackles for loss, no sacks, 0 QB hits. I believe he had 2 hurries, but And Joel Klatt said it midway through the game that he did not call Chase Young's name at all because he didn't make many plays. But when you have a very good team like that, when you're ranked top 5 in defense, number 1 offense, you're just a well-rounded team, you have other guys that can pick up the workload, that can make big plays. So they have a rematch with Wisconsin this weekend. The first time they played Wisconsin, the final score doesn't tell the tale. It was 38-7, but midway through, I believe the third quarter, it was a 3-point game or something like that. Wisconsin can compete with them, especially if Wisconsin can get the run game going. That was their biggest problem in the first matchup. Ohio State held Jonathan Taylor under 55 rushing yards that game. If Wisconsin can find a way to pound the rock a little bit with Jonathan Taylor, they'll have more of a chance to win the game. They have to air it out a little bit too, because if you're just eating clock with the run game, Ohio State has the offense to put up points. If Wisconsin's down 10 or 14 points in the third quarter, I don't know if they can come back from that. I think the most they can go down by is a touchdown, maybe 10 points. But they got to keep the game close. Definitely control the game with the rushing attack, but they need to find that balance with with the passing attack. So let's move to LSU and Georgia. This is a game I've been excited for a couple weeks because it was kind of obvious these two teams were going to match up. I think it's the best matchup for LSU so far this season. Obviously, Alabama is a very good team. It was a really tough environment that they went into in Tuscaloosa, but Georgia has a top 5 defense and they're explosive. They get to the ball. I think LSU's defense has to step up. They've been shaky all season. They were floating around the 40-something-ish ranked defense. Right now they're at 35, I believe. They did only allow 7 points to Texas A&M, but A&M is also ranked 62nd in scoring offense. A&M is not a high-powered offense, but I think morale-wise, it was really good for their defense to just make a big statement like that, like a big 50-7 win. And LSU's defense can catch their breath a little bit because Lawrence Cager is out for the season. George Pickens is suspended for the first half due to his actions versus Georgia Tech when he got in that fight. I get he's a young player, but you got to know better than that, especially with the matchup you have next week with LSU looming. And DeAndre Swift is questionable. Kirby Smart said he's hopeful DeAndre Swift will play. I'm assuming he will. He did go down with that shoulder injury versus Georgia Tech. I think DeAndre Swift will play, but say DeAndre Swift is out, then that's a guaranteed Lawrence Cager, who's your top wide receiver target, and DeAndre Swift. Both of them are gone. And then you have George Pickens out for a half. LSU's defense, if that all happens right there, LSU's defense has to take advantage of that early because Georgia might be the first defense this season that can really stop LSU. I thought Bama was going to be the first defense that can really stop them, and then LSU went out there and put up 46 points on them. But it's a number 5 defense versus the number 2 offense. And this is from NCAA.com. This is in total offense and total defense. Georgia's number 5 defense. LSU is the number 2 offense. But the biggest key to victory for Georgia, at least, Georgia's defensive line has to anchor Joe Burrow. And I think they can win this game. If they anchor Joe Burrow, if they don't let the pocket collapse, and they time their blitzes perfectly, that's the biggest thing. Because you could send all the pressure you want at Joe Burrow. He has such a great pocket awareness. Even if you look at the film from last week versus A&M, the pocket completely collapses. And Burrow showed that he wanted to get upfield. He wanted to start running upfield, took a step up, took a step back, took a step up, took a step back, and then just, boom, fired the ball right out of his hand over the middle. It's funny because he's not like a 4-2 guy. He's not going to blaze you with speed, but he's so smart and he knows when to run. I think Georgia has to really confuse him. Blitz, you have to time them right. Because on the season, Burrow's completion percentage is about 70% when he's blitzed. And LSU gives up a little. They give up a little over 2 sacks per game, and Georgia averages a little over a little over 2 sacks per game. So if you can get to him, but you have to time when you get to him, I would. If I was Georgia, of course, I'm not a defensive coordinator, but if I were Georgia, I would time my blitzes right, and I would, for the most part, just send 4-man rushes. Maybe you'll send like a stunt crash on one side, something like that. But you got to try to confuse him, because at the end of the day, he's still a college senior. He's not an NFL guy. He doesn't have as much experience as a 6-7 year NFL vet. If you can confuse him a little bit, make him make bad throws, because that's the biggest thing. You don't see him make bad throws. Against Texas in the second game of the season, it was a big third down play. Texas sent the house at him, and Burrow just found the crease. Clyde Edwards-Helaire had a great block on a linebacker flying up the middle. But he found a crease, he wiggled his way through the pocket, and he found, I believe it was Justin Jefferson, for a long score. So if Georgia's going to win this game, they're going to have to contain Burrow. LSU might have to find a rushing attack just to balance it, keep a little pressure off Burrow. And if Jake Fromm can find his old form, he's definitely struggled this season. If he can find his old form, if Georgia can give a little time, if they can balance their rushing attack as well, I believe Georgia has a great chance to win this game. But hey, we're going to see. And so next we have Utah and Oregon. I think Oregon's in a perfect position to play spoilers, because after their loss to Arizona State, I think, for the most part, they're out of it. Even if they win this game, it's going to be hard for two-loss conference champion to make it. But they're in a perfect position to play spoilers, because at this point, they're looking for the best they could hope for is a 12-win season. Win this game versus Utah, and then win a bowl game after that. They went 9-4 last season. So although they're not going to get what Justin Herbert came back for, which is, I'm assuming, a national championship. That's what he's playing for. So I wouldn't call it a win, but it's a much better season going 12-2 than 9-4 like last year. So I think they're in a perfect position to play spoiler. It might be Justin Herbert's final collegiate game. With guys sitting in bowl games now, I don't know what he's going to do, if he's going to play, if he's going to sit. But if they can get guys, like Johnny Johnson out in space, get him on those tunnel screens or some on a deep route, something like that, they can, because Utah, has a very good defense. That's the biggest thing you hear from Utah, is that they're third in total defense, but they're 25th in total offense. So if Oregon can make this a shootout, I think Oregon can control and win this game, because I don't know if Utah has the offense to keep up with them, but I think Oregon is just in a perfect position to play spoilers, because for the most part, they really don't have anything to lose. And they only have something to gain in a conference championship and a good bowl bid. So that's going to be an interesting game. I want to see how that plays out. Gut feeling, I think Utah will take this. But we'll see. With the Big 12, Baylor and Oklahoma, it's an interesting game, because it doesn't matter who wins. I don't know if either will make the college football playoff. Oklahoma definitely has a better chance, but even for Baylor, they're going to be hungry, because it's a rematch of their disastrous game, or whatever, when they fell apart versus Baylor. Versus Oklahoma. Sorry, they were up 28-3, and Oklahoma came flying back and beat them, and that was at Baylor. But I think if Oklahoma doesn't go down big early on, they're going to win this game. But Matt Rule has a tough defense, but Oklahoma did show that they could put up 34 points on them. There's a lot of unfortunate circumstances for Oklahoma in that first matchup, I believe, which really put them in that deficit. If they can just, work out a couple of those kinks, if they don't, I'm just my gut feeling for this one as well. Like I just said for Utah, my gut feeling for this game is if Oklahoma doesn't go down big early, even if they're down by 14, if they're down by 14 in a conference championship and they don't come back, I don't know how they came back because this is going to be at a neutral site. I don't know how they were in Baylor or at Baylor, down 28-3 and came back. So I would imagine they'd be able to come back from 14. Anything bigger than that, I don't know. But as long as they don't go down big, I think they'll take control early in this game. I mean, Jalen Hurts and Lincoln Riley, they've both been here. They've both been in these big games, especially Jalen Hurts, playing over in the SEC. He's played in the SEC championship games, national championship games, Iron Bowls versus LSU. Like he's played in big-time games. I don't think he's overlooking this game. Of course he's not overlooking this game, but I don't really think he'll have butterflies or anything. I think Jalen Hurts is going to be very, very, very calm, very, very cool and collected. And this time, he has CeeDee Lamb as well. He didn't have CeeDee Lamb in the first matchup, but having CeeDee Lamb back for this one is going to be huge. He's just an unbelievable athlete. And there's a lot of unbelievable receivers in the NCAA right now. CeeDee Lamb's got to be top 3, top 2. I mean, most people, probably including myself, you'd put Jerry Jeudy 1 just because he's an absolute freak athlete. But even with guys like, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb has to be right up there. Like along with like Jalen Waddle, Henry Ruggs, Devontae Smith. But yeah, CeeDee Lamb is just an unbelievable athlete. I also think Jalen Hurts is the most important player in the game for both teams. Because if Baylor can isolate him, Baylor needs to isolate him, and Oklahoma needs him to produce. So one of the two will happen. I don't think both things can happen. If one of the two happens, that team will win. If Baylor isolates him, I believe Baylor will win this game. I think by at least 9-10 points. But if they can't isolate him, and he starts producing, throwing the ball downfield, especially if they let him use his legs, I think Baylor can win this by 2 scores. But I want to get to this segment now, the who's in and who's out. So here's some quick scenarios. I was saying early on when I started the show, there's a lot of random, a lot of weird scenarios, and if you think about it too hard, it's going to make your head hurt. So I've had a headache all day. So if Ohio State, Clemson, and LSU win or lose, I think they're still going to be in the top 4. You go undefeated in the regular season. For the most part, you dominated everybody you play. One loss at the very end, you can't be, especially for LSU. LSU is playing a great opponent. Ohio State is playing Wisconsin, Clemson with Virginia. They're not the best match. They're not bad teams. I'm not saying they're bad teams. They're good football teams, but it's not as big of a matchup as LSU playing Georgia. But I think any of the 3 lose. I think if all 3 of them lose on Saturday, all 3 of them will still be in. There's no way you can keep them out. They've been so good. But another scenario, if Georgia beats LSU and Ohio State and Clemson lose as well, I think that's the top 4 right there. I think that'd be the easiest thing for the committee, as weird as it sounds. In this scenario, I guess it doesn't matter if Ohio State or Clemson lose, because I think they're just going to be in no matter what. But if LSU loses, I think it'll be Ohio State or Clemson 1. Depends how they look in the conference championship games. I think it'll be Ohio State because the committee has shown they don't want to put Clemson past 3, they'd be 2 in this case. So I think it'd be Ohio State, Clemson, Georgia. Who would be 3? I would probably LSU 3 and then Georgia 4. I think the easiest scenario for the committee. But the next scenario, Ohio State, LSU, and Clemson all win. So Georgia loses, Georgia's out. And then Baylor wins and Oregon wins. So Oregon beats Utah and Baylor beats Oklahoma. I think Baylor gets the 4 spot. If Ohio State, LSU, and Clemson all win and Baylor wins and Utah wins, I think it comes down to how they won, but Utah will take it. Like if they play the exact same game and they both win in the exact same way, I think Utah would get in over Baylor, mainly because the committee has shown that they favor Utah and don't have as much respect for Baylor. But if Utah and Oklahoma both win, I think OU would sneak in, mainly because, like I said, Lincoln Riley and Hurts have both been there. And and that they've competed in playoffs. They had one of the greatest playoff games, probably the greatest playoff game to date. I mean, maybe you could put Clemson beating Alabama over that, but like the Baker Mayfield and Sony Michel, Jake Fromm, like Rodney Anderson, all these guys going at it. What was it, 2 years ago in the Rose Bowl? That was an unbelievable game. So I think the committee would favor Oklahoma in that case. And so I was watching ESPN earlier, and if the teams who are favored to win its respective title games win, Oklahoma has a 61% chance to make the college football playoff. Utah has a 20% chance, and Georgia has a 17% chance. So like I said, Oklahoma is definitely favored in the most recent scenario gave, but the way it's going to shake out, it's just so interesting. It's exciting. There's going to be some really good football on this weekend. I hope you guys tune in, and I thank you guys for tuning in today. Again, this is the Triple Option Podcast, Episode 3. I'm your host, Jeremy Breferi. Thanks for tuning in.